Good morning everyone, I am Virgila Dao. I tackle the background of the author and his work. Washington Irving, born April 3, 1783 in New York, US, died November 28, 1859 in Tarrytown, New York. Writer called the first American man of the letters. He is the best known for the short story, The Legend of the Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. The Legend of the Sleepy Hollow is a short story of speculative fiction by American author Washington Irving, contained in his collection of 34 essays and short story entitled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. Through Irving was American, he wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow while he was living in Birmingham, England, in the year 1820. The story is one of the oldest examples of American fiction with persistent popularity, particularly around the Halloween. The story takes place in 1790 in a Dutch colony in New York called Sleep Hollow. The legend of Sleepy Hollow is the presence of the supernatural. The entire town of Sleepy Hollow is said to be haunted by various ghosts and spirits. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was the longest story published in the collection, called the Sketchbook for short. Along with the story of Rip Van Winkle, the two stories are often found together in a different books, collection, and other representations. In addition, both are often included in examination of Romanticism and early American literature. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow has been adapted for television and film in many times. The first was called The Headless Horseman, and it was a silent film released in 1922. One of the most well-known adaptations of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is The Adventures of Ichabod Bud and Mr. Toad.
Themes in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The first is imagination and reality. In The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the narrator presents Tarrytown as a place where people love to gossip about horror tales and supernatural elements. Therefore, the entire town seems to be in a dreamy enchantment of those tales. Anyone coming from other areas also gets affected by the spells of the town because they also shows interest in such folktales. According to the narrator, it is a place abound with chronicles and great men. Unfortunately, Ichabod Crane also fails to separate the real from the imaginary. The Tarrytown has a witching influence upon the residents and those who live there for a while. It is because of their eagerness to discuss these tales and they think of them as real historical events. Ichabod's flaw to make the difference between fiction and reality becomes a hurdle in his goal to gain Katrina. Although Ichabod loses Katrina, he presumably runs away from the horrible town where the supernatural has a firm place in people's lives. He makes a man of himself by becoming a successful judge. Indeed, the ghost tales have their place in history and they represent the fictive data of the place. However, living warns against the molding of those imaginary tales in one's reality. Next theme is supernatural elements. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the title itself, refers to the story as a horror tale. However, from the narration, it does not seem to be under a bewitching influence. For example, is the people of Sleepy Hollow take interest and pride in telling ghost stories. They love to talk about the supernatural. To elaborate, they repeat the tales of the Headless Horseman, Major Andre, and the Woman in White. By excessive involvement in those tales, they incorporate the effects of supernatural. For example, is Ichabod is quite interested in learning about novel horror tales. However, he feels that they happen to him later on. Even when Brombones fabricates a fake story about his race with the headless horseman, Ichabod experiences in the next moment. The horrible history of the place does not tend to be real. It is entirely made up. In any case, it is real when it overpowers the psyche of people. Lastly is the greed. The story defines how greed and gluttony gets a horrible end. As in the beginning, it is discussed that Ichabod's job as a teacher cannot fill his belly, so he has to rotate in different lodgings to get more food. He is a huge feeder with a great engulfing capacity. In his desire to marry Katrina, Ichabod's ultimate wish to become ultra-rich would be fulfilled because she is a tempting morsel for him. Therefore, despite his strong opponent, he decides to continue his lust for Katrina's wealth and farming goods. Whenever he visits her father in the farm, Ichabod imagines all of the beautiful animals and birds as his feast. He thinks that he will be a rich guy with all the goods as his sole ownership. In this over-imagination, he loses everything, even his job as a school teacher. He also overpowered by the supernatural forces that he creates in his mind. Irving's careful selection of vocabulary also describe Ichabod's greed. For example is, he considers Katrina as a tempting morsel, to be consumed. He also likes horror stories and swallows them passionately. It is because in early American society, huge greed for consumption was common. The people were eager to gain more material goods and raise their status above others. However, as Irving depicts, this greed can have a negative impact on life.
The Legend of Sleepy Hollow characters. First is Ichabod Crane, a young schoolteacher from Connecticut who comes to Sleepy Hollow to teach the town's children. And Ichabod is tall, lanky, and somewhat awkward looking. He loves singing and dancing. He also gives singing lessons and believes that he is excellent at both dancing and singing. Katrina Van Tassel is the only daughter of Baltus Van Tassel, and Katrina is not portrayed very favorably in the story, where she is a flirt and encourage both her suitors to continue pursuing her even as she refused to choose just one. Next is Bron Bones. Bron Bones, his full name is Abraham or Bron Van Bron, who loves to play practical jokes get himself into duels and brag about his exploit. His name reveals his brute strength and contrast with Ichabod's splendid figure and fearful sprint, but Brown Bones is largely harmless, and the townsfolk both admire him for his muscles and roll their eyes at him for his immaturity. However, Brown Bones may be cleverer than he appears. He pays close attention to Ichabod's fear of ghosts and goblins, and the story suggests that it may very well to be Brown Bones who chases after Ichabod in the guise of the headless horseman. Carrying a pump in for the sprint head, if this plan was to chase Ichabod away from Katrina, it worked. Brown Bones thus end up marrying the damsel. Next is Baltus Van Tassel. Baltus Van Tassel is the father of Katrina Van Tassel, and a wealthy farmer whose estate bursts with natural and culinary abundance. And Van Tassel gives his daughter a relatively high amount of independence, allowing her to choose of her suitors and eventually husband of her own accord. The last one is Headless Horseman. Horseman, also known as the Galloping Hessian of the Hollow, where his head was born of during the Revolutionary War. And as the story goes, since his death, he leaves the churchyard where the body is buried each night and gallops off in search of his head.
To the left lot of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. The legend of Sleepy Hollow tells the story of Butcherbird Crane and his helpless attempt to win the heart and hand of Katrina Van Tassel in the context of comical ghost story. Ichabod comes to Sleepy Hollow, New York, from his home state of Connecticut to be the schoolmaster of the village. Sleepy Hollow is a small, very quiet town said to be under some kind of enchantment. Its residents all seem to move a little slower, they dream a little more, and be more prone to believe in the supernatural. Sleepy Hollow may be for the reason or maybe because its residents are almost all descended from its original Dun settlers, has more than its fair share of supernatural occurrences, or at least stories of them. Sleepy Hollow's most famous supernatural phenomenon is the ghost of the Headless Horseman, said to be a Haitian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. The horseman is seen most often riding by the church, where local historians say he was buried. He is believed to be always in search of his head rather. Ichiban is fascinated by this story, being especially interested and prone to believe in tales of the supernatural. Ichiban is a strict teacher but not a cruel one, doling out his punishment of the road only to those who can handle it. Ichiban makes almost no money, and it is customary in the village of the farmers whose sons he teaches to feed and board him in rotation. Along with this, each would make some extra money teaching, singing lesson. He prides himself greatly on his magnificent voice. This arrangement keeps him employed and gives him any opportunities to hear ghost stories from the farmers' wives and eat meals with the farmers' daughters. He also has an insatiable hunger and taste for the finer things. Katrina Van Tassel, a beautiful young woman of 18, is one of the Inchabod students. Katrina Van Tassel, she is also the only child of Baltus Van Tassel, one of the more successful farmers in the area. Ichabod is quickly taken in by her flirtatious charms, but it is when the first visits her father's abundant farm that he considers himself truly in love with her, or at least her likely inheritance. He quickly sets out to win her hand in marriage, coming by coming by the Van Tassel from farm frequently to woo her. Ichabod is not only in his attentions to Katrina. However, her beauty, charm, and wealth have entranced many other men in the village, especially to the formidable Brom Van Bron, also known as Brom Bones. Brom is notorious for his mysterious personality, love of pranks, and great skills at horseback riding rather, all of which make him something of a village hero. Brom has already scared off many of Katrina's other suitors, but Ichabod is harder to shake, avoiding physical confrontation with Brom, which is Brom's main method, intimidation. Without the option, Brom turns to his next best skill, pranks. He fills the schoolhouse with smoke, trains a dog to follow Ichabod around howling, and that's many other pranks to frustrate and humiliate Ichabod. One day, a messenger comes to the schoolhouse to invite Ichabod to a party at the Van Tassel, best man in the house. When the party is over, he stays behind. For some reason, however, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen. He finds the fat home dark and early quiet. He tries to keep himself from getting too scared, but soon after he fasts the possibly haunted major Andres tree. He sees a large dark figure looming nearby. He does not respond to his call, but for some reason. However, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen for some reason. However, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen. It starts to move and joins him to the fat, riding a large dark horse. Ichabod is greatly disturbed and tries to shake off his pursuer, but he fails. Finally, he notices that the rider has no head on his shoulder. That head seems to be sitting on the saddle in front of the man. Ichabod tries to get his decrepit horse to run home as fast as he can. But he is not a skilled rider and the horse resists. They end up the church, the scene of most of the stories of the headless horseman, and Ichabod race to the bridge, where the ghost is said to disappear and not to follow. Ichabod crosses the bridge and looks back, but he sees the horseman instead of disappearing, hurl his detached head at him. It knocks Ichabod of his horse. The next day, Ichabod's horse returns to its owner's farm, but there is no sign of Ichabod. A search party finds hoof prints and Ichabod's hat with a smashed pumpkin left next to it. Ichabod is never heard from again in Sleepy Hollow, although later of it seems that he is alive elsewhere and has told his story. Some of the townspeople believe that Brom Bones pulled off a great prank, which put Brom in the final position to marry Katrina. But the old woman and local folklore maintain that he was taken by the headless horseman. Currently finds himself the best man in the house. When the party is over, he stays behind. For some reason, however, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen. He finds the fat home dark and early quiet. He tries to keep himself from getting too scared, but soon after he fasts the possibly haunted Major Andres tree. He sees a large dark figure looming nearby. He does not respond to his call but Asa for some reason. However, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen for some reason. However, Katrina disappoints him. Ichabod leaves crestfallen. It starts to move and joins him to the fat, riding a large dark horse. Ichabod is greatly disturbed and tries to shake off his pursuer, but he fails. Finally, he notices that the rider has no head on his shoulder. That head seems to be sitting on the saddle in front of the man. Ichabod tries to get his decrepit horse to run home as fast as he can. But he is not a skilled rider and the horse resists. They end up the church, the scene of most of the stories of the headless horseman, and Ichabod race to the bridge, where the ghost is said to disappear and not to follow. Ichabod crosses the bridge and looks back, but he sees the horseman instead of disappearing, hurl his detached head at him. It knocks Ichabod off of his horse. The next day, Ichabod's horse returns to its owner's farm, but there is no sign of Ichabod. A search party finds hoof prints and Ichabod's hat with a smashed pumpkin left next to it. Ichabod is never heard from again in Sleepy Hollow, although later of it seems that he is alive elsewhere and has told his story. Some of the townspeople believe that Prom Bones pulled off a great prank, which put Prom in the final position to marry Katrina. But the old woman and local folklore maintain that he was taken by the headless horseman.
Good day everyone, my name is John Ken Santina and I will be discussing the book summary of the legend of a Sleepy Hollow. The story begins in a small town of Sleepy Hollow. It is a quiet town between the Tappan Zee and Hudson rivers, in a very small market town named Tarry Town. The narrator of the story tells us that everyone in Sleepy Hollow is, as the name would suggest, dreamy and sleepy at all times. The narrator tells us that this may be because of a curse or a spell. A Sleepy Hollow, we're told, has its fair and share of curses, superstitions, legends, and odd happenings. The town's most prominent legend is that of a horseman who rides around the town by night with no head on his shoulders. The horseman is believed to be a Hessian soldier left over from the Revolutionary War. The townspeople believe that he may be searching for his head. as he often seen rushing throughout town. The horseman is referred to by people as the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. By day, the town has its small pieces of normalcy. The schoolmaster, Ichabod Crane, is a man newly arrived from Connecticut. He is a taught schoolmaster, believing in punishing children who act up beating them with a rod. However, he is not without mercy and he only uses the rod on children that he feels can be buried. The weaker students are treated with much more patience. Ichabod's students admire him greatly and due to the custom of the time he prevails upon one student's family per week of room and board as his pay is too little to keep a house of his own. Ichabod keeps very few possessions and does his best to be useful in homes that he stays in, often helping on farms and always being agreeable. Ichabod is also the singing master of the town that makes some extra money doing this. He is considered one of the most intelligent men in Sleepy Hollow, second only to the town's parson. Because of this, many of the town's women find themselves lusting after Ichabod and wanting him for a husband. Ichabod does much reading. He is most interested in the book History of New England Witchcraft by Cotton Mather. The parson from the town of Salem, Massachusetts, who preside over the famous Salem witch himself, a firm believer in the supernatural. He often spends so long reading frightening stories at the school that he must sing hymns to himself on his walk home so that he is not afraid of the dark. He also greatly enjoys the story of the Headless Horseman and listening to the local housewives to tell the story. Katrina Van Tassel is one of the Ichabod's singing pupils, an 18-year-old known throughout the area for her family's wealth and her incredible beauty. Katrina is the daughter of a very wealthy farmer and entertains many suitors looking to make her their wife. Ichabod finds himself falling completely in love with Katrina, as he is taken in her charms and impressed by her father's wealth. He decides that he must marry her. However, Katrina has other suitors who are rivals for her affection. Among them, a man named Brom Van Brunt is the largest threat to Ichabod. Brom is a troublemaker, a loud and rowdy man, known in the town for his feats of strength and heroic actions. He is well respected and liked throughout the town. Many of Katrina's other suitors have given up the competition for her hand in marriage because of the threat of Brom. However, Ichabod is not daunted by Brom overall. He does court Katrina more secretively so that the other man will be less likely to hear about it. This is made easier for Ichabod because he is able to court Katrina while performing as her singer teacher. Katrina's parents do not notice how Ichabod acts toward her. Katrina returns that the affection of both men and rivalry develops between them quickly. Brom challenges Ichabod to a physically challenge, but Ichabod refuses. Well aware that he would obviously lose, Brom becomes frustrated by the refusal and begins to play practical jokes on Ichabod in front of Katrina in order to diminish him in her eyes. For some time, the conflict between these two men continues with wins on both sides. One day, a messenger comes to invite Ichabod to a dinner at the Von Tassel's farm. He sent his students home early so that he may be prepared for the party. Ichabod decides to wear his best and only suit, borrows an old, unused horse from the farmer that he is currently staying with, and rides out to the Von Tassel's farm. The horse named Gunpowder is aged and somewhat sickly but still strong and ready for a fight. Ichabod arrives safely at the park. Many prominent farmers from the area are there with their wives. Rom is also there with his whiskey horse, Daredevil. Ichabod arrives safely at the party. Many prominent farmers from the area are with their wives. Rom is also there with his whiskey horse, Daredevil. Ichabod eats everything inside at the dinner and dances much of the night with Katrina. Rom can only look at the two jealously. After the dancing has ended, Ichabod begins to chat with some of the older men about ghost stories. The headless horseman is brought up. Among other local legends, Brom tells his own story of encountering the headless horseman. He says that he offered to raise the specter for a bowl of punch. Ichabod does not believe this, but does not interrupt. Late into the night, the party disbands. Ichabod stays on after everyone leaves to speak with Katrina. The narrator says that they do not know what happens in this conversation, but that Ichabod leaves the house looking disappointed, and that the reader must use their imagination to fill in the gaps. It is used to be assumed that Katrina was only using him to make herself sure of Brom's affection for her. Ichabod sets off for home on his old horse during the darkest hour of the night. As he rides, he begins to remember all the ghost stories that he heard that night. He begins to get more and more uncomfortable and frightened as he approaches Sleepy Hollow's church, the area where the headless horseman is said frequent most. He makes it past the church, but when he comes to the bridge over a nearby stream, his horse suddenly stops. Across the stream, Ichabod spies a tall, dark shape that he cannot identify. Frightened, he calls out to ask who is it. There is no answer on Gunpowder, and Gunpowder still does not move. Ichabod starts to nervously sing a poem. The figure, a large horseman, suddenly anything. Ichabod tries to speed up and lose him, but the horseman matches his pace easily. When the two go through a patch of moonlight, Ichabod realizes that the horseman is headless. His dedicated head is resting on the saddle in front of him. Panicking, Ichabod tries to lose the horseman again by bolting forward. However, this only spooks his horse, and Gunpowder accidentally veers in the wrong direction from Sleepy Hollow. Toward the old church, Ichabod's saddle slips as he is racing away, and he begins to fall, only manage to stay on grabbing Gunpowder's neck. They approaches the church, and Ichabod recalls that the horseman is supposed to vanish at this point. From the tales that he has heard, he does, but as he does, the spectre stands on his stirrups and launches his head at Ichabod. The head hits Ichabod and knocks him from his horse. The next day, Gunpowder shows up back home at the Van Reaper farm. However, Ichabod is not with him. The The schoolmaster does not show up for dinner that day, and Hans Van Rieper becomes so worried that he insists on sending out a search party. They find many hoop springs and eventually find each of us that discarded next to a smashes in pumpkin. They still do not find each of us. The townspeople assume that he was taken off by the headless horseman, and since he was not in any debt in the town, they decided to worry no more about it. Some of the townspeople assume that Ichabod merely left the town out of shame of losing Katrina. Broom is especially delighted to hear the news of his rival's disappearance and finds the tale very assuming, especially the smashed pumpkin part. Soon, Katrina and Broom marry. The schoolhouse falls into disrepair, and the townspeople assume that it is haunted by Ichabod's ghost.